Hello everyone and welcome to this WFA chat session, which is our monthly coffee break discussion. I'm Ollie Theocaris, I'm head of content for WFA. I'm leading this session today from quite sunny London, which is a bit of a shock for everyone. So I hope you all have your coffees at the ready. I hope you have your phones on silent and you're ready to think about yourself and what we can do to improve the industry over the next 20 minutes or so. So as always, this is an informal session and we are live. So we would absolutely love for those watching on Swap Card to interact throughout. So you should see to the right of your screen a chat box. If you can't see it, have a hunt around for it. It might be minimized and I'll be asking you to input at different times. So do be prepared to put your coffee down, type your thoughts or questions in here. We have about a 30-second delay, and also we are recording this session. So if you do input, we won't refer to you by name when we're reading the comments. So I think we want to get started on this subject matter. So today we have our guest speaker, WFA Ambassador Smriti Kanakapali, who is an enterprise strategy and transformation leader at Cargill Animal Nutrition and Health. And we're going to discuss some issues over coffee today. So she is here to share her views on something I think we all need to have a good think about at the moment, and that is finding an effective work-life balance. So I'm really looking forward to talking about this today. So hello Smriti, thank you for being here today. Before we get into this topic, can you just start by telling us a bit about yourself and your career background and how you got into the position you're in now?
Sure. Well, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening for everyone who's joining us today. My total pleasure to be here and be chatting about this, right? It's definitely a topic that I've wrestled with, and I'm sure we've all wrestled with at some point in our careers. So funny you should say sunny London, because I am sitting in the Minneapolis area, and it is a foggy, misty morning here. So that is where I am based out of. So you already mentioned I am the strategy and transformation leader for Cargill's Animal Nutrition and Health business. I've been with Cargill now for a little over 5 years. I started out as part of our strategy and corporate development function, and then moved into supporting our business role more recently. Prior to this, I worked with Bain & Company doing management consulting, supporting clients in a few different industries, so CPG, retail, but mostly in the areas of strategy and performance improvement while I was there. I'm originally from India. I've moved around a ton. So I've lived in parts of Africa, lived across South and Southeast Asia. And as I mentioned now, been in the US for a little bit here and currently in the Minneapolis area. Married, have one daughter who is right around 2 years old. So it is definitely a busy home life as well.
Fantastic. I think given your family situation as well as your work situation, you're very well placed to give us your thoughts on how we find that elusive work-life balance. So just a reminder for those watching, if you do have any questions or comments throughout this session, do post them in the chat box. We'd love to get to them at the end and get your thoughts on things. So my first question for you, Smriti, do you think the additional working from home situation that so many of us have experienced over the last 18 months has helped or hindered people's work-life balance?
Yeah, so it has certainly blurred the lines, right, between work and home. I remember sort of midway through the pandemic, I was reading this article and I thought it was really interesting because it talked about commute time. And, for most people not having to commute, for me, it used to be sort of a 20-minute to 30-minute commute each way. You'd think adds back a bunch of, time that you can then use for a variety of things around the house. This article took a whole different spin, right? They were talking about how that commute time was really a little bit of a reset, right? So going into work, reset and creating that boundary or separation between home and work, right? Allowing you to sort of think about like mentally, what's my to-do list today at a minimum? And then on the way back home, right, same thing for the evening. What are we having for dinner? And, do I need to buy stuff for my kids? Without that commute time and the blurring of the lines, for me, it's been, I would say, a little bit of a double-edged sword, right? The best part about the pandemic, especially with as young a child as I have, is I've been able to see her sort of in between meetings, quick coffee break or bio break, and I get to see her in between, which would have not been possible if I was at home. So that's a big plus. I think the big downside for me is it's created a very different type of mental burden, or right, without that separation, where I feel like I am always on from a work perspective and I am always on from a home perspective. And that's that blurring of the lines, which I found has, for me, been the biggest challenge, right? It's less about the hours or the split between the hours at work and the hours at home. For me, it's been more that there isn't that clear, discrete separation between, all right, this is the time that I am at work and I'm fully focused, and this is the time that I'm at home and I'm fully focused. So I think that's been, for me, the biggest challenge with this, with the work from home and finding that new balance, if you will.
Mm. No, I would completely agree. I do think you're right about blurring the lines. It's a really good way of thinking about it. And I know for, in London, I know those with families who've been able to pick up their children from daycare, which seems crazy, but was not something that people could do before very easily. I mean, if the trains were down or if there was traffic, the stress those people were facing, they don't have to experience that now. But then, as you say, the number of emails I'm getting through from people who are working in their time zones at 10, 11 p.m. is a lot higher than it was a few years ago, before we started working from home more. So I completely agree with blurring the lines. It's a very interesting way of seeing it. And I think we need to put things in place to make sure those lines become a bit more defined, I think, moving forward.
Yes.
So I also wanted to ask you about women in all of this, because often we think about that elusive work-life balance, but do you think it's more challenging for women to find that balance than maybe men?
$1 million question. And I've had this discussion with mentors, with colleagues, with friends, right? I think ultimately it is, so work-life balance, and what I've learned is really being able to be clear about what your needs are and being able to set those boundaries. And I think that's what women find really hard to do. So it's less about, work-life balance as this really big concept, right? It's more about expectations and setting boundaries. And so as I reflect on my career, right, there have been times where I've worked 80-hour weeks and still managed to feel like, my work and my personal life are in balance. And that's because I didn't have much in terms of demands from a personal life perspective. And on the flip side, there have been times where I've had a 40-hour week and have felt completely out of that balance, right? And so I think I've come to the realization over time that for me, when I think about work-life balance, it's less about like the discrete day in, day out balance. It's more about over time, and that could be weeks or months. Am I able to find the time to do the things that really matter to me, right? Like that I hold sort of very close from a just personal values perspective. So it's not about am I finding time to, eat and sleep and work out. All of those are important, but I don't think we should be thinking about those as having work-life balance, right? I think we should expect of ourselves that those can over time become much more of the norm. But then am I finding the time to, volunteer or learn a new language or travel, right? Whatever those other things are that give you fulfillment outside of work. Coach your kids, sport team, right? If that's really your thing. And so over time, if I'm finding right, in pockets, a week here, or, a few hours in a week there. And I feel like that is in balance. Over time, it feels like my life is in balance, right? And so the day-to-day work life of like, how many hours am I working, and do I have time on the back end? I think we can work through that, but really setting your boundaries and really being specific with your teams about, hey, this is the thing that's really important to me, and I'm going to make the time because I am a better person when I come back and I've had that time to work on it. And setting those expectations, I think, is why women find this so hard. Is that we're never good about thinking of our needs first, right? But my realization is that that's what's needed for us to feel like we are in this balance.
It's so true. I think so many of the women watching have had to fight for their roles. They've really kind of had to put the hours in and progress. And it's the same for many men too. But I think because of that, as you say, it's a lot harder for those who have been working at a certain level for years to then set those boundaries when other things enter their lives. It's a real challenge. I would love to know.
And I will say, right,
go ahead.
we don't one of the challenges that I had early on is, in some cases, we don't have great role models in the workplace that we see doing this really well and saying, there's someone I can look to learn from, right? When I started my career, I remember we probably had like one woman manager, and this was, I was an engineer. We had one woman manager for every 5 male managers, right? And so just having the examples to look to and learn from, few and far between. And I think that's been a little bit of a challenge as well.
You're so right. And it's also breaking down those stereotypes. I mean, slowly but surely we are seeing more men who are confident enough and not being, I suppose, pressured enough to follow the standard stereotypes of your female partner will pick up the children and sort the cleaning and the cooking and all those things, because I think there are so many men out there who would love to spend more time with their children and also find that work-life balance, but they're getting a lot of pressure as well from other factors that are impacting them. So the sooner we can destroy these stereotypes and say, you know what, in a relationship, you've got to find either that balance or you allocate the tasks based on whatever works for you in your relationship. I think that's really important.
Well said.
I would also like to ask as well, if anyone is watching has any thoughts on, tell us why if you think it's more challenging for women to find that work-life balance or men. When I was thinking about this question, I was also thinking about the mental load that often women have to take on in terms of, coordinating the household. I mean, there's a lot of studies out there that have said that despite who is the main breadwinner, women in a heterosexual relationship often be the person who takes on more of the household coordination and organization responsibilities, which I think can have a bearing on that, that blurring of the line, as you say, because you're thinking about home stuff during work and you're thinking about work stuff during home. I think it can make it slightly more challenging in that sense as well.
Yeah, and the time we spend on that, planning and things like that, right? We don't realize it because we're doing that while trying to get a work email out. But it is, right, mental time spent. And even if you have a partner who's really great, right, and I am very fortunate in that regard, who's really great about, the actual tasks or activities at home and sort of, dividing that up, that mental time spent, right, that doesn't go away. So I think you're right in that there's just maybe, in some case, different types of things that are on our plate as women than we sort of consciously think about and give credit for and make space for as well.
Mm-hmm. And I think it's an evolutionary thing. I was having a ponder about this as well, and I know that back in the caveman days with our ancestors, the men would be very focused on one thing. They would go out hunting and get the job done, whereas the women were gathering, looking after the children, making sure everyone's safe, getting everything together, sorting stuff out. I think we're just people who sort things out, and so I don't think that's going to change. But I think having awareness of that being a thing, that you are potentially taking on those additional, your brain is taking on those additional responsibilities. I think it's really worth thinking about. Certainly.
Right.
So I want to now get to, I suppose, the crux of the matter. What do you think are some of the tips or advice that you could suggest for those who are maybe struggling in this area and think, I need to do more to allocate to my work life and my home life and keep them separate?
I would go back to that point around, setting those boundaries. Mm. And you're right? Because because of the stereotypes that exist, I don't think we've been comfortable sort of saying, hey, here is what I need, right? I need to be able to leave at 5 p.m. to be able to pick up my child from daycare, and I need to make sure that I am offline between 5 and 7 or 8 whenever they go to bed, because that's my time with my child. Or every Tuesdays I need to go take a piano lesson, right? Because that's what's important for me. We don't set those boundaries, and right, it can't be 20 different things that you're asking to set those boundaries around. But what I found is, if you can identify the one or two things, and that'll change by life stage, career stage, and all of that, right? But if you can identify those one or two things that are really important, and then be vocal about them with your teams, with your colleagues, I found, and nothing but support when I've asked, right? A lot of times that first barrier is the fact that I just haven't asked. Because when I have, everyone's like, sure, right? Take the time, right? We're all professionals. We will get our work done and flex our schedules. And the beauty of technology today is that it lets us do that flex. But I don't think we're actually taking advantage of it to serve our purpose, right? And so to me, that would be the biggest thing: of recognize what are what those one or two needs are, and then be vocal and set those boundaries. That's probably the only tip that I have used and that I would give in this instance.
I think that's so important, though, because I've never been on, have I? No, I can't think of a time where I've been on a team where someone has requested, can I finish slightly early on this day to go and do this? Can I, finish at 4:30 p.m., to pick up my child and start an hour early? Those sorts of things are very rarely rejected by a team manager, because if you're amazing at your job and you're absolutely smashing it, they want to keep you happy. They want you to be in the best frame of mind to do your work. So I completely agree with that. I think that's some really sound advice there. Share your boundary, decide on your boundaries and share them with everyone so they're fully aware, so you aren't going to be invading your personal life with work-related activities.
I will say, as a manager, that actually works really well to build up your team as well, right? Because when you start, right, especially when you start working with a new team, when you start by saying, these are my boundaries and my needs, it helps the team open up in a way that you may not have done in the past. And then they feel like they're empowered as well. And so, right, as you sort of think about, individual contributor to manager roles, I would say it becomes a really important tool to engage your teams as well. And I found great sort of power in just being upfront about my needs, so that then the team can do the same as well.
I think that's also a good point. We work in a competitive market. You don't want people to leave. And if they know that they can come to you and say, you know what, I need to do this on this day every week, and they know that you're probably going to say yes, then that's a reason for them to stay at the company, because they know that they've got a manager they can kind of trust to support them in their work and their personal life. It's a good point. I've actually mentioned one tip that I think before, maybe on a webinar quite recently, that always sticks with me. But we interviewed Caroline Keeling, who is the CEO of Keelings, which is a food producer in Ireland. And she said to me, she never does any work or even thinks about work. And I think this is the key, thinks about work after 9 p.m. in the evening. Now, I don't know about you and everyone watching, but I will often lie in bed thinking about work-related things. And actually it's something that I know one of my colleagues has tried to implement over the last few months, because, you know, it's where you are physically, but also where you are mentally. And if your mental brain is constantly thinking about work, you aren't going to be in a good state of mind when you do actually need to do that work. So I think that's a really important thing, that if you can teach yourself to switch off, it doesn't even have to be 9 p.m, maybe 7 p.m, it's whatever works for you. I think that is something that could be really valuable moving forward.
Did she say how she does that? Because to your point, right, I do the same thing, right? Lie in bed sometimes and I'll be like, okay, I have to remember to do X, Y, and Z tomorrow, and that thought will constantly just be in my mind. I can't switch off. So if she shared how she manages to do that, that would be great.
She did not, but I think when we talked about it after, she said she just puts it from her mind. So what I've been trying to do is, when I think about work, when I'm lying in bed, I say nope, and I think about something else. And it's, you know what, it isn't as difficult as you think, although there are some issues that will keep you up at night. They're always going to be in a job, things that really stress you out. If, you know, 8 or 9 times out of 10, that little niggling thought can be replaced with, for me, I think of a really nice beach and try and think about lying on a beach, then it is something that can be valuable. But it's a good point. It's not necessarily going to work 100% of the time. It's something that we can try and utilize when we can. I think I'm going to have a look at our comments now to see if we have any thoughts come in. So yeah, we have a question here and a few comments that have come in. So first question for you. Do you think working after hours helps with visibility? And if one joins a company where everyone does that, will it hinder their chances for promotion if they don't? It's a very good question.
It's a great question. So in my experience, no, right? I think and maybe this is, you know, it depends on the region you're working in and the culture you're working in, but at least, you know, and fortunate to have a global role, right? Where I've seen people do this in different regions. I think some of it is, you know, the teams you're working for, and this whole point around visibility. I think it certainly used to be a big deal, where if you were the first to come in and the last to leave, you got noticed. I would like to think we are beyond that now, and it is much more around, you know, are you getting, you know, your work done, or, you know, accomplished successfully, is probably the, you know, as a manager, that's what I look for, right, with my teams, whether they're on at 8 a.m. or 8 p.m. and, you know, whatever works for them is what I tend to tell my teams. So I would like to think we've moved beyond that, and it's much more around, right, setting your goals, getting agreement with your team and your manager about those goals, and then as long as those get accomplished over time, in the time that we said they would get accomplished, that's what I'm thinking about. Versus, right, you know, am I green on instant messenger, right, for 12 or 14 hours a day?
No, I agree. And actually, a friend was telling me about that. She said when she goes for she takes a break, she tries to check in regularly on Teams so people can still see she's logged in. And I just thought, that's insane. But, you know, every company is different. But I agree. I think any manager worth their weight in salt would be looking at your output. And I think if you're having problems with that, then I think if I was in your shoes, I would be demonstrating your output to management. So if there is that culture where they do expect you to be there, you're still demonstrating that you are doing your work, but in less time than everyone else, which is arguably better. It means you're better at your job. So yeah. We've got another question. Go ahead.
Have that candid conversation, right? You know, back to setting your boundaries and what's important to you. Have that discussion with your manager to sort of, you know, ask, is that truly the expectation, or is that just your perception of the expectation? Because I think sometimes we read into things that are not actually there, as individuals and employees, right? We do that all the time. So
it's very true. So we actually have a kind of follow-up comment from there. So some companies are now giving the option for employees to work from home work from the office or hybrid, so they're giving those choices. In your experience, have you seen that electing to take on these flexible programs to work remotely negatively affects career growth for women? What are your thoughts on that?
So we're all learning, right, with the pandemic. I think, so much of it depends on the company. Cargill's global, right? My team is global. So I have people who have never been, in the same location as me. And so even before the pandemic, 90% of our interactions used to be, via video conferencing technology. And so I wouldn't say that impacts career growth, right? I've been in situations where my manager is not in the same location as I am, and a lot of it is, we talk a lot about sort of finding mentors. What I would actually sort of maybe think about is, in your location, finding someone who can be a sponsor, right? So I don't think it matters that your manager is not in the same location or that you're working hybrid and not seeing them, right? But find other avenues to sort of make your work get noticed, in addition to your manager, right, being aligned in terms of your goals and things like that. But I don't think hybrid has an impact. I mean, like I said, we've been on teams, all of us, I'm sure, that have been sort of global at one time or another, and it all seems to work, just as well. But I do think for women, from a career advancement perspective, finding those sponsors is probably the a key thing that I've found really helpful, and so that's what I would sort of suggest in that situation.
That is some really great advice. There you go, everyone. Get yourself a sponsor who can help fight for you within the business. And as we said before, focus on the output and the work that you're doing, and make sure that you're still speaking to your manager about it and they're aware of the work that you're doing. We have one more question. We've already overrun, but I really want to ask it. So how do we get through to those old school attitudes for those who are stuck in the past, those who claim that women don't have a disadvantage? What are your thoughts on that?
I think it comes back to the point you were making about stereotypes, right? I think one of the most powerful conversations and concepts that have come up as we sort of talk about inclusion, gender diversity, etc., is allyship. And in the case of gender diversity, right, men as allies can be really, really powerful. And I think it will take, right? I mean, women, standing up and fighting for, equality or equity, right? Women being, clear about their boundaries will all help, right? We need to sort of, start and speak for ourselves. But I think increasingly this needs to be a solution where everyone is in it together. And I think, finding the men at your workplace, right, colleagues that have spouses or partners that that also work, that are maybe in similar situations as you are, who can be that thought partner and help you break through those stereotypes, I think is going to be the key. And I think we're fortunate that we're starting to gain traction on a lot of those things in the work environment. So I would say thank you to all the great allies we have in the workplace.
Mm-hmm. Very important. So important. We, on our advisory board, we have tried to get as many men as possible involved, because it's so important for men and women across the industry to see that they are taking a stand and saying diversity and inclusion is important. So it's a really good point. I'm going to call that a day there, because we always overrun, but the conversation is just too good. So thank you so much, Smriti, for taking the time to speak with me today.
Thank you.
I've really enjoyed the discussion and really good advice that's come out. So it's been fantastic to get your thoughts on this. I'd like to thank everyone for watching who's tuned in. I hope you enjoyed it. We will be having another coffee break discussion soon, so do join if you can. Thank you for tuning in, and have a good day, everyone, wherever you are in the world.